Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and welcome to my astrology channel. Now, if you've been with me these past 6 months, you'll know I base my video on what's coming up, astrologically speaking, in the week ahead. But more recently, I've been focusing on a particular alignment. In fact, I've done a kind of 3-part series on it, the Saturn Pluto conjunction. And that seemed to be so popular with so many of you that I'm feeling confident that I can really take the astrology into a sort of more deeper and what I believe a more kind of fascinating it's a different kind of look at the astrology. You can, of course, get all your weekly, monthly, yearly forecasts on Astrolutely.com, and you can also get an in-depth audio recording, which is prepared for each of your signs. So you're not losing out on anything sun sign wise, but you're just really expanding your picture. Now, last week really was, well, it was the week that was. I mean, sometimes the astrology disappoints in a way, because although there may be events that kind of match the astrology, they're not quite what you expected. And sometimes, of course, they happen a week or two later, and you can trace them back because the signature will be, the astrological signature will be on those events. But last week was not like that. The lunar eclipse, the approach of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and Uranus stationary direct, all these massively important alignments really produced or really mirrored, reflected, resonated with, however you want to think astrology works, with the events that happened. There was flight 752, which of course it turned out was shot down by the Iranians. And on the same day, we had that absolute bombshell announcement by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex that they were going to withdraw from their royal duties, so to speak, or being in the mainstream, as it were. And of course, we're still experiencing the shock waves from that. Indeed, one of the things I'm going to spend my time talking about today is about the Uranus effect, which is very clear and present within the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's combined astrology. And I also want to look at the fact that Uranus, of course, is now becoming a more important influence in the wake of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And we are going to have, or we're going to feel, sense a sort of different dynamic in the astrology. Now, to get on with the specific astrology, next week, Mercury will move into Aquarius and it will square Uranus on Saturday. The following week, the Sun will enter Aquarius and we'll have a new moon in Aquarius. And I'll be talking about that next week because it's also the start of the Chinese New Year. So we feel we're sort of on the threshold of some big and awe-inspiring developments. And I would say, yes, we are. And certainly a change, as I said, in the astrological dynamic. Now, of course, on Monday, this Monday, the 13th of January, the Sun and Mercury will pass over that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and we really are feeling the effects of everything about that. Remember, in my last 3 videos, I've talked about reformation being the key word that goes with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Reformation, and we can see that what's going on here is all sorts of realignments, particularly with the Iran and the America situation, and we can certainly see it happening within the royal family as they look at their constitution and figure out quite how to make these accommodations for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The Queen has apparently given a matter of hours for this announcement to be made as to what really will happen in regard to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. And we know that there is an enormous powwow on Monday as the Sun and Mercury pass over that Saturn-Pluto conjunction held with the royal family in Sandringham. And so really history is in the making. Now, one of the things that I've just mentioned is the Uranus effect. And Uranus is a prime mover in the lives of Harry and Meghan. Now, the interesting thing is, this isn't something that is really in their charts individually, as I'll show you in a moment. They are not what you would describe as Uranian individuals. Uranus isn't a particularly strong force in either of their charts. It's there, but it's sort of left of center, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. but put their astrology together, create a chart of the relationship called a composite, which I'll show you in a minute. And Uranus is really a force to be reckoned with. And at every singular moment in their relationship, Uranus has been a prime mover. Even on the bombshell announcement last week, not only was Uranus stationary direct, so already a very powerful candidate for importance, but it was high overhead in a most dominant part of the horoscope when the news was broadcast. When their announcement they made on their Instagram page, Uranus was in pride of place. Now, one of the other things about, this planet is, and we should really understand what its keywords are. We're looking at change, diversity. We're looking at rebellion and controversy. These are the hallmarks of this planet, and we need this planet because without it, we wouldn't cross new frontiers in knowledge, experience, science, the arts. It's everywhere and extremely important. But it's like it's like dynamite. It's a little unstable, and you don't get all these good, expansive growth effects from it without a lot of disturbance and a lot of upset. And this is certainly what we've seen in the light of the Sussex's announcement. Now, at the meeting when they met on July the 1st in 2016, Uranus was a strong force at that point. When they announced their engagement, Mars was opposing Uranus, and on their wedding day, Mars was square Uranus exact. And even little Archie, when Archie was born, Uranus had just risen. And there are some other features of his chart which play into the dynamics of the astrology of Meghan and Harry. And I think this is where I want to go now. I want to actually start showing you some of the astrology. I'm not going to get too bogged down in details that are too technical, but I certainly want us to be able to look at the charts and see how this is happening. And for some reason, it's not coming up as it should. There it is, finally. And on your screen, you have the chart of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. And I'm talking here, I just mentioned the fact that Uranus isn't a really strong and dominant planet. And we tend to think, or we talk about a planet being strong when it's on the midheaven here, when it's rising, and also when it's on the descendant or when it's on the IC, the very bottom of the chart. Or it's the sun ruler or the ascendant ruler. But here in Meghan's chart, we have Uranus. Look, there it is, like a little television aerial. It's in the 5th house of creativity and self-expression, and it is beautifully trining the ascendant. So it's certainly in there. It's not that it's an unaspected Uranus, but it isn't strong and dominant. We have what is dominant in her chart, really, is the Sun and Mercury in Leo. They're rising to the ascendant, so a very strong Leo personality, but it's coming through a Cancerian ascendant. So there's that soft, kind of crab-like, cautious, defensive, screen-changing kind of aspect to her personality as well. I'll mention one last thing about Uranus in connection with Meghan, and that's this Venus-Uranus connection. It's actually a quintile, which is rather a special kind of influence. And this is part of her magic. We might even say a kind of sexual magic, and certainly her charm and appeal. So it is important, but it's not dominant. Now, if we look at Prince Harry, we can see here that Uranus is not a particularly strong figure. Again, let's look at the midheaven here in Scorpio. Saturn is on the midheaven, not Uranus. And in fact, Saturn is the complete opposite of Uranus. Saturn is all about tradition and caution and, doing the right thing, if you like, law and order being dominant, not Uranus, the rebel. And more importantly, Capricorn rises, making Saturn his ruling planet. So we can see in these two features alone that Harry is really someone who toes the royal line, who really cares about tradition and history and the continuity of the royal family. And if you think back to the Harry we used to know, this really kind of charming, lovely guy. He loved the army. He was very approachable and was quite the hero in everybody's mind, really, which is why I'm introducing the Uranus effect to him when the relationship came together. Now, he does have some Uranus in his chart. Mars is kind of close to Uranus, but it's separating. It's about 8, nearly 9 degrees away, and we call that a very wide connection. Mercury is a little closer. It's a square to Uranus, so he has his kind of, he has his quirky side, he has his revolutionary aspect, but it's kept well in check by Saturn on the midheaven and Capricorn rising. So let me show you now what I call about, what I mean when I talk about a composite chart and a chart of the relationship. Now, this is when you combine two charts and you cut them sort of in the middle. And this chart has been with us for about 30 or 40 years since it came into practice, and it's very revealing. I've worked with this for well over 30 years and find it such an interesting expression, a representation of the relationship itself. Two people's lives combined come into a relationship. And I think if we think about relationships for a minute, we never think we change as people. You know, we are the same as we always are. That's who we are. And that's a reflection of the natal chart. But let's think about things in life that changes. Becoming a parent, that definitely changes us. Taking on a really very important job or a life-changing event will change us. And when you enter into a relationship with another person, it's a committed, hopefully lifelong relationship, that changes you. And of course, the relationship is, as I'm looking at it in this composite chart, an entity in itself. So why do I say Uranus is a strong focus here? Well, here we find the sun in the relationship in the 11th house of teamwork and being a team together and being always good friends, so to speak. Collaborations, all those sorts of things like charity work and their care for the human race and climate change. And all of this is wrapped up in this 11th house composite sun of theirs. It is square, exactly square, the planet Uranus within minutes. And it is the closest aspect of the horoscope, and therefore it's going to dominate. Now, you will also notice here that Saturn and Pluto are rising to the ascendant here. And what is interesting about this is that, of course, they met as, you know, Saturn and Pluto were beginning to have a relationship with each other. The timing was right. And of course, at that point, Uranus was also at 24 of Aries, so directly opposing this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So Uranus introducing itself into the narrative yet again. But also right now on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, we have exact right now all this brouhaha, this decision to leave the royal family, to have their own lives. That's what's come about. And I think looking at the astrology, you'll see how really impressive it is. Now, I want to show you one more thing here, which I hope will come up. This is the one I want. This is, no, we're still not there. I'm trying to show you here a chart of the wedding, but maybe I haven't got this in. No, I haven't got this in my particular little slot here. But what I want to tell you about the wedding chart, the engagement, as I said, was announced on a Mars-Uranus opposition, and the wedding itself took place on an exact Mars-Uranus square. So Uranus, again, a very strong voice. And we can really trace the seeds of what's happening now back to that very day when they became man and wife on that Mars-Uranus square. The seeds of the rebellion, if you like, or the changes, the diversity were really sown. And what I want to point out here, that Mars square Uranus took place as Uranus was at 0 degrees of Taurus, and that is the Queen's sun. It's Prince William's Jupiter midheaven combination, and it is also Prince Charles's moon. So all we astrologers could see right from the get-go that Harry and Meghan were going to be a controversial couple. They weren't going to do things the normal way. And at first, at the wedding, if you remember the wedding, which was full of diversity, there were 2,400 commoners invited to the event, which was unusual. They were in the grounds of Windsor Castle, never happened before. We had a beautiful gospel choir. We had an extraordinary speech by, if you remember that, the speech went viral because it was so off the wall in many ways, but a beautiful thing. And the whole day really resonated with a couple with a difference. And I think all astrologers thought they would follow this course and do their very own thing. But I think, in all honesty, I don't think any of us really thought that there would be a break from the royal family within effectively 18 months of their wedding. I mean, that's really quite revolutionary. So why did that come about? Aside from the astrology, let's put the astrology to one side for a minute and think about Meghan, who is really the prime mover. She is what changed everything by her presence within the royal family. Now, to begin with, this was thought to be a breath of fresh air, and the royal family and Great Britain, in fact, not the world, embraced Meghan as a real sign of royal growth and, her charm, her Americanism, her mixed race, even the fact she was divorced. But does it matter? No, because why? What matters is love that matters, and everybody embraced that. But as time went on, and in fact, you could almost trace it back to the wedding and the event that produced disharmony with her and the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate, was perhaps an issue, according to rumor, was an issue over the bridesmaid's dress. And it illustrated something about Meghan that perhaps a lot of people didn't know initially, was that Meghan wants things her way. And I want to look at this in the sense of the difference between American women and British women. And American women want what they want, and they want it now, and they go and get it. They're very upfront. They're very out there. They don't, put a lot of pretense on it. That's who they are and what they want. Now, I'm not saying that British women aren't just as ambitious, just as capable of getting what they want and going after what they want, but it's done behind a veneer that looks anything but that. And if you think then about the royal family, the typical British stiff upper lip, the way of towing the line and, putting the greater before the lesser, so to speak, it's very different from the way Meghan would do things. She wants things to be right, and she doesn't see why that isn't possible. And of course, she is a Sun Leo with Mercury in Leo, and that's a first house Sun, Mercury in Leo. So there was always going to be a point where push came to shove, where Meghan was not prepared to tolerate perhaps the treatment, we can call it, she was getting, whether that was by the press or whether it was within the royal family itself. In her growing up, when she was at school, Meghan was bullied, and she stood up to the bullies and overcame it. And that's her way of doing it. She stands up to things, she addresses it, she goes for it. And if things aren't tolerable, and I remember in an interview recently, she talked about this isn't a life. So for her, things were intolerable. So now we look at Harry's presence in this mix. By nature, he does toe the line. He is a member of the royal family. He is a Capricorn rising, Sun Virgo with Saturn on the midheaven. But everything changes with that composite, the union of Meghan and Harry. Now, Uranus is to be embraced. And he is totally behind this new life, totally behind his wife. They are Uranus, Mr. and Mrs. Uranus, and they are going for it. They're going for independence. And I think in many ways, we have to applaud that, even though there are, of course, voices that would say, this is having your cake and eating it. And also how unsettling and, in a way, unkind to the Queen. And there again, we look at that Uranus on her son, and the same with Prince Charles and also Prince William. So I want to move on. I want to wrap up in a way. This is a week when the Saturn Pluto conjunction is still very much with us, and particularly on Monday. So we're still going to feel the ramifications of all that intensity and all the conflict and adversity that has been around will still be with us, but let's not forget it's beginning to fade. And what's coming in its place is this Uranus Aquarian kind of, I don't want to use the word energy, but it's a different kind of dynamic. Let's look at it that way. So this is in general for us all. And I think we're going to see this change, this shift in situations out there on the world stage. And we can fully expect, as Mercury squares up to Uranus on Friday, that Harry will probably leave Great Britain's shores and head to Canada for his new life. And of course, his wife and his child. So it's a case of onward and upward, my friends. And I will be with you this time next week. In the meantime, take care.